The Cheyenne Rail Depot was a bad joke. 6 days on a train, and for what? To stand on a creaking platform while the Wyoming wind tried to steal the cameo brooch right off her throat. It was the only part of Evelyn Blackwood that still felt like Boston. Behind her, a porter wrestled with a trunk full of books and dresses that had no business being here. None at all. "Last stage to Thunder Valley leaves in 20 minutes, miss," the station master grunted. Evelyn clutched her ticket, damp with sweat. At 32, she was what they called a spinster, a woman married to her father's library. Until the telegram came, a teaching position, a last chance. It had to be. She'd sold almost everything to get here. There was no turning back, no home to return to. This was it. "Weather's turning fierce," the station master warned, pointing a thick finger at a sky the color of a bruise. Might want to wait, but she couldn't wait. Waiting was what she'd done her whole life. "I'll take my chances," she said, the words sounding braver than she felt. Inside the stagecoach, a missionary clutched his Bible, and a wool merchant with eyebrows like angry caterpillars stared at her. A proper Boston lady, so far from home. As the horses lurched forward, she watched the depot disappear into a swirl of snow. Her old life, gone in a blink. The ride was a nightmare. The coach swayed and groaned. The wind howled like a banshee. Boston's neat brick rows were replaced by wind-carved rocks that looked like the bones of giants. "Driver's a fool to push on," the merchant muttered. Hours crawled by. The windows frosted over, trapping them in a cold, rumbling box. Then, with a violent jolt, they stopped. The door was yanked open, letting in a blast of Arctic air that stole her breath. "End of the line, folks," the driver shouted over the storm. "Too dangerous. We're turning back." "But Thunder Valley," Evelyn started. "It's still 20 miles ahead." "And 20 miles closer to our graves if we try for it," he cut her off. "There's an old line shack a mile back. We wait out the storm there." Her trunk, full of her last worldly possessions, had to stay. She had no choice. She followed the others into the howling white void, her thin leather boots useless against the snow. She could barely see the dark shapes of the men ahead of her. They were ghosts in a world gone white. But when they reached the spot where the shack should have been, there was nothing. Just an empty clearing. The storm had blinded them, turned them around. The driver's face was a mask of fear. "Keep moving. There's a ranch a few miles north, if we can reach it." But Evelyn never heard the rest. Her foot caught on something buried in the snow. She pitched forward, a cry swallowed by the wind. By the time she scrambled to her feet, the others were gone. Vanished. She screamed their names, but the storm ate her voice. She was alone. Utterly alone in the heart of the Wyoming winter. And night was falling. Jake McCall knew the sound of his own solitude. 2 years of it had taught him the language of an empty house. The groan of old timber, the whisper of wind, the soft creak of floorboards. So the new sound, the sound of a footstep where no footstep should be, cut through the quiet like a gunshot. He stood at the window, his dead wife's wedding ring cold against his chest on its leather cord. Fresh tracks in the snow, heading straight across his north pasture. Sarah would have been out there already. She never had his darkness, his caution. But Sarah was gone. He pulled on his old cavalry coat, the blue wool worn thin. The war had taught him to trust his gut, and his gut was screaming. "Getting soft," he muttered, checking the revolver at his hip. The whispers in town had reached him, of course. They called him the Widowmaker. Said Sarah's death had frozen his heart solid. Said he was as cold and unforgiving as the land itself. He saddled his stallion, Ghost, the morning sun glinting off the silver in his dark hair. The tracks were small. A woman, maybe. The spacing was uneven, exhaustion, injury. The last thing he needed was a stranger. The last thing he wanted was to let anyone into the fortress he'd built around his grief. Ghost's ears pricked forward. Jake followed the horse's gaze. A dark shape, half buried in a snowdrift. Not a wolf. Human. He dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. A woman, dressed in fine Eastern clothes totally unfit for this country. She was curled into a ball, her face hidden. He touched her shoulder. Ice cold. But she was breathing. Just barely. Thunder Valley was hours away. The doctor might as well have been on the moon. She'd be dead long before help arrived. Which left only one choice, the one he'd sworn he'd never make again. He was bringing a stranger into his home. Into Sarah's home. Some things are worth the risk, Sarah's voice seemed to whisper on the wind. Not this time, he answered aloud, lifting the unconscious woman onto his horse. Just until the storm passes, then she's gone. But as he mounted behind her, her head lolling back against his chest, a feeling he hadn't had in 2 years washed over him. The feeling that a single choice could change everything. He stiffened, already regretting it. But it was too late. He was committed. Ghost picked his way home through the deepening snow, carrying a ghost of his own and a woman who was about to bring all of Jake's buried ghosts back to life. Warmth. That was the first thing. Then the crackle of a fire. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open. She wasn't in the snow. She was on a soft bed, in a simple room. A man sat by the fire. A man who looked like he'd been carved from the same rock and wind as the landscape outside. My trunk, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Gone with the storm, most likely, he said, his voice deep and rough. He didn't move, just watched her with eyes the color of a winter sky. You're lucky to be alive, Miss Blackwood. Evelyn Blackwood, she corrected, trying to smooth her hair, suddenly aware of the impropriety. A strange man. His house. Alone. And you are? Jake McCall. This is my ranch. He stood and poured something from a kettle. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it chased the cold from her bones. I'm expected at the schoolhouse in Thunder Valley. A flicker of something crossed his face. Amusement. Pity. Thunder Valley Schoolhouse has been empty 3 years, he said flatly. Last teacher couldn't handle the isolation. But the telegram. She reached for her small bag, only to find it missing. Found this in the snow near you. He handed it to her. The telegram inside was a soggy, illegible mess. Her future, her one last chance, dissolved into a blur of wet ink. There must be a mistake, she said, her voice trembling. Storm's got other ideas, he said, pulling back the curtain. The world outside was a churning vortex of white. We're locked in, at least 2 days, maybe more. Her heart sank. 2 days, alone, with him. Surely there are neighbors. 15 miles south, and I'm not riding out in this. He turned back, his expression unreadable. There's a bedroom down the hall, my late wife's sewing room. You can stay there. Late wife. The words were both a relief and a new source of dread. The grief in his voice was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak that filled the room. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be, he said, his tone sharp as broken glass. You didn't cause it. He looked at her ruined boots, the tremor in her hands. Can you walk? She pushed herself up, swaying. Each step was agony. After 3 steps, he sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. Without warning, he scooped her into his arms. She was so startled she forgot to protest. This is highly irregular, Mr. McCall. So is freezing to death in city boots, he countered, carrying her down the hall. You'll learn different rules out here, Miss Blackwood, if you plan to survive. The room was small and neat. It smelled faintly of lavender. Sarah's room. He set her down gently on the bed. Rest. We'll figure out what to do with you when the storm breaks. He was almost at the door when she called his name. Mr. McCall, thank you for saving my life. He paused, his hand on the door frame, his back to her. Don't thank me yet, Miss Blackwood, he said, his voice low. The storm's just beginning. He didn't say which one. Night fell fast and hard. Evelyn woke to a growling stomach and the unsettling quiet of the house. The thought of facing Mr. McCall was daunting, but hunger won. A knock at the door made her jump. Supper's ready. She found him in the kitchen, setting out bowls of venison stew. The sheer domesticity of the scene was jarring. This hard, dangerous-looking man, moving with a quiet efficiency. It's not what you're used to, he said without looking up. But it'll keep you alive. They ate in silence, the only sounds the howling wind and the crackle of the stove. She studied him when he wasn't looking, the scar along his jaw, the silver at his temples. The way his hands, rough and calloused, handled the spoon with a surprising gentleness. You have questions, he said finally, catching her eye. Ask them. She hesitated. The townspeople, they call you the Widowmaker. His face hardened into a granite mask. People talk too much. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped his lips. You want to know if I killed my wife? Not with a gun, no, but I might as well have. Sarah, she was like you, not made for this country. But she loved it enough to ride out in a storm like this one to help a neighbor's calf be born. Horse spooked, broke through the river ice. He stopped, his jaw working. By the time I found her, well, people need someone to blame. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have. No, you shouldn't have. He stood abruptly, taking his bowl to the wash basin. I'll be in the barn. Lock your door tonight. His words hung in the air, not a threat, but a strange sort of warning. After he left, she stayed at the table, the house creaking around her. She had never felt so alone in her life. On impulse, she started cleaning the kitchen. It was something to do, a familiar motion in a terrifyingly unfamiliar world. As she worked, she saw them, Sarah's touches. Hand-embroidered curtains, a shelf of neatly labeled preserves. The ghost of another woman lived in this kitchen. No wonder he preferred the barn. He returned an hour later, stamping snow from his boots. He stopped short, seeing the clean kitchen. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. She had heated water for tea. Would you like some? He hesitated, then nodded. They sat by the fire, a fragile truce forming between them in the warm silence. Outside, the blizzard raged. Tomorrow, he said, finally breaking the silence. You learn how not to be helpless in this country. Back in Sarah's room, she locked the door, not out of fear of him, but out of fear of everything else. The storm, the loneliness, the terrifying, exhilarating feeling that her life had just been shattered, and she had no idea what shape the pieces would take when they landed. Dawn brought a blinding whiteness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world remade in snow and silence. Outside her door, she found her clothes from the day before, dried and neatly folded. And next to them, a bundle. Men's clothes, worn trousers, and a thick flannel shirt, a pair of sturdy boots. Jake was in the kitchen, an armload of firewood cradled against his chest. You'll want to wear these, he said, nodding at the bundle she carried. Can't teach you ranch work with you tripping over skirts. They were Sarah's. Wearing a dead woman's clothes, it felt like a transgression. But the alternative, her flimsy Boston dress, was unthinkable. In Sarah's small room, she changed. The trousers felt scandalous, the boots heavy and solid. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, someone stronger, more capable. Someone who might actually survive this. Jake's eyebrows rose when she returned to the kitchen, but he said nothing. Just handed her a plate of salt pork and a cup of coffee. "Eat up," he said. "You'll need it." The day was a blur of lessons in survival. He taught her how to bank the fire, how to find kindling, how to split wood without losing a finger. His hands were patient, his instructions clear and concise. When she almost burned herself on the stove, his hand shot out, his calloused fingers wrapping around her wrist. "Careful," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He dropped her hand as if it were a hot coal, his face unreadable. Outside, the world was a glittering, frozen jewel. "Watch your step," he warned as they walked toward the water pump. "Ice is treacherous." As if on cue, her foot slipped. She grabbed for the nearest thing, which happened to be him. For a heartbeat, they were frozen, his arm instinctively around her waist, her hands clutching the front of his coat. She could feel the solid strength of him, smell the cold air and pine on his clothes. "Sorry," she mumbled, stepping back, her face hot despite the cold. "Smaller steps," he said gruffly, turning to the pump. "You're not used to the weight of the boots." They worked together, breaking the ice, their breath mingling in the frigid air. There was a raw satisfaction in the work, a feeling of purpose she hadn't known was missing from her life, of books and quiet rooms. By late afternoon, every muscle in her body ached. They were heading back to the house as the sky began to bruise with twilight. "Storm's circling back," he said, studying the clouds. "Might be stuck another day." The thought didn't scare her anymore. Inside, she stopped dead. Down the hall, a door that had been closed before was now slightly ajar, and through the gap, she saw it. Books, shelves and shelves of them. "Meant to keep that closed," he said, a strange note of discomfort in his voice. "You have a library," she breathed, the wonder in her voice unmistakable. Before he could stop her, she was moving toward it, drawn by a force as strong as gravity. She pushed the door open. Every wall was covered, floor to ceiling. Shakespeare, Milton, Thoreau, first editions, rare collections. A leather armchair sat by the window, a silent invitation. This wasn't just a collection of books. This was a man's soul laid bare on the shelves. "Sarah thought I was crazy," he said from the doorway. "Said I could have bought a whole herd for what these cost to ship." He finally stepped into the room, his sanctuary. They were my escape, during the war, afterwards. They reminded me there was still beauty in the world. He pulled a worn volume of Shakespeare's sonnets from a shelf. "She used to read to me in the evenings." He handed her the book. It fell open to a page annotated in two distinct hands, his, sharp and masculine, hers, elegant and flowing. A conversation carried on across the pages, across time. "I never expected," she began. "A rough rancher to appreciate poetry," he finished, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Out here, Miss Blackwood, we're all more than we appear. The territory demands it." He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw past the widowmaker. She saw a soldier, a scholar, a grieving husband, a man of impossible complexity. "Would you read something?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He took the book, settled into the leather chair, and the rough edges of his voice softened as he read. "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments." Outside, the snow began to fall again, a soft curtain dividing them from the world. But inside that room, a bridge was being built, page by page, word by word. When he finished, the silence was heavy with unspoken things. "Dinner," he said, rising abruptly. "Learning to survive works up an appetite." But as he passed her, he paused. "The library is yours to use, Miss Blackwood. Books shouldn't sit unread." She waited until he was gone, then ran her hand across the leather spines. He had just handed her the key to his locked-up heart. The only question was, did she dare to use it? The next morning, Jake wasn't alone in the kitchen. A massive black dog lay by the stove, its tail thumping a slow welcome. "That's Bear," Jake said. "Was out with the cattle. Thought I'd lost him." The dog padded over to Evelyn, nudged her hand with its cold nose, then leaned its full weight against her legs, a gesture of complete trust. "He likes you," Jake said, a strange softness in his voice. Sarah was the only other person he ever did that with. The name hung in the air between them. Today's lesson was horses. In the barn, warm with animal heat, he introduced her to Belle, Sarah's mare. "Gentlest creature on 4 legs," he said. He handed her a curry comb. "Firm, but gentle, like this." His large hand covered hers, guiding the motion. The contact was electric. He pulled away quickly, but stayed close, his voice a low murmur as he taught her the intricate steps of saddling a horse. "Too loose, you'll slip," he explained, his arms reaching around her to check the cinch, his body close enough for her to feel his warmth. "Too tight, you'll hurt her." For a long moment, they stood like that, wrapped in the quiet intimacy of the task. Bear barked outside, shattering the spell. He taught her to ride in the snowy corral. She was awkward at first, but Belle was patient, and Jake's instructions were steady and calm. "Relax," he called from his own horse. "She can feel your fear." When Belle shied at a clump of snow falling from the roof, panic seized her. But Jake's voice cut through it. "Stay calm, gentle on the right rein." She did as he said, and the horse settled. She hadn't fallen. She had handled it. "Well done," he said, and the quiet praise warmed her more than the winter sun. Later that night, the storm drove them back into the library. "Tell me about Boston," he said suddenly. "What makes a lady leave all that for this?" She told him everything. About the pitying looks, the whispers of Spinster, the life lived in the shadow of her father's grief. "The telegram wasn't an escape," she finished. "It was a promise of purpose." She looked at him. "Your turn. What brings a man who reads Shakespeare to the middle of nowhere?" He was quiet for a long time. "The war," he said finally. "It makes cities feel like cages. I needed space." He touched the ring on its cord. "And I found Sarah. She was the only one who didn't look at me like I was broken." He told her about Sarah's death then, the words rough and torn from him. It had happened 2 years ago. Yesterday. Evelyn realized with a jolt. That's why he'd been out in the storm. He'd been looking for her ghost. "That's why they call me the Widowmaker," he finished, his voice raw. "They think I should have stopped her." "You couldn't have," she said, surprising herself by crossing the room, by laying a hand on his shoulder. "We can't control the ones we love." His hand came up, covering hers. "Guess we've both got our ghosts." "Yes," she whispered, "but at least yours loved you back." He looked up at her, and the grief in his eyes was so profound it stole her breath. She found herself leaning in, drawn by a force she couldn't name. A log crashed in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. They jumped apart as if burned. "It's late," he said, standing abruptly. "Storm's supposed to break tomorrow." He paused at the door. "Those Boston folks were wrong about you, Evelyn. Education isn't something to hide. Sarah taught me that." The use of her first name hung in the air long after he was gone. Bear rested his heavy head on her knee, whining softly. It was becoming complicated. Dangerously complicated. Morning brought clear skies and the sound of sleigh bells. Evelyn was at the kitchen window when she saw it cresting the hill. Jake stiffened, his hand going to his hip. But his posture relaxed as he recognized the driver. "Doc Miller," he called out as the sleigh pulled up. The doctor was a weathered man with kind eyes. His gaze flickered between Evelyn in her borrowed men's clothes and Jake standing beside her on the porch. "Heard the stage lost a passenger," the doctor said, climbing down. "Found her trunk in a snowdrift. You must be the new schoolteacher." Then his expression changed. "Ah, about that. Miss Blackwood, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. That telegram you received. It wasn't authorized. Someone's idea of a cruel joke. You're the third one this year." The world tilted. A joke. Her journey. The books she sold. The risks she took. All for nothing. A cruel prank. "You knew about this." Jake's voice was low and dangerous, directed at the doctor. "You let them leave her in a blizzard?" "Mr. McCall, please." Evelyn's own voice sounded distant, thin. She fled into the house, the shame and humiliation a bitter taste in her mouth. She started changing back into her city clothes, her hands trembling. The door opened. It was Jake. "Don't. Please, I feel foolish enough." She couldn't look at him. "You could stay," he said, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. "Stay." She turned then, saw the raw emotion on his face. "And be what? Your charity case, a replacement for Sarah?" "That's not, isn't it?" she shot back, yanking her corset tight. "The educated woman who loves books and needs saving. I won't be pitied, Mr. McCall. Not by you, not by anyone." "Damn it, Evelyn, I'm not pitying you." He stepped closer. "2 days ago, this house was full of ghosts. You brought it back to life." He reached for her, then let his hand fall. "Stay. Not for Sarah. Not for safety. Stay because—" A sharp knock cut him off. "Miss Blackwood, sleigh's ready." The spell was broken. "Goodbye, Mr. McCall," she said, her voice hollow. "Thank you for everything." "I think I already found what I was looking for," he said softly as she walked away. But she didn't look back. She couldn't. She made it halfway to town before the world went gray. The cold from her night in the snow had been hiding in her bones, waiting. Now it struck, a burning fever that made her teeth chatter uncontrollably. "Good Lord, you're on fire!" Doc Miller's voice came from a great distance. "Have to get you back to McCall's, closest place." She wanted to protest, but darkness was already pulling her under. The last thing she heard was the jingle of sleigh bells, turning back toward the man she had just run away from. The fever was a cruel thief. It stole time, stole reality. Sometimes she was in her father's library, the books all blank. Sometimes she was lost in the snow, calling a name that had no sound. And sometimes a woman sat by her bed. A beautiful, sad woman who looked like the faded photograph on Jake's mantelpiece. "You're afraid," the dream Sarah whispered. "Just like I was." Through the haze, real voices cut through. Doc Miller, his tone grim. Bear, whining by the bed. And Jake. Always Jake. His voice a rough anchor in the storm. "Fight it, Boston. You're stronger than this." Cool cloths on her forehead. Strong hands lifting her to drink bitter tea. Once she felt lips press against her hair, heard a whispered plea. "Don't leave. Everyone leaves." "Not this time," a voice answered. But she didn't know if it was real. She woke to the quiet sound of breathing. Jake was asleep in a chair by her bed, looking exhausted, his jaw dark with stubble. He woke the instant she moved. "Water," she rasped. He helped her drink, his hand gentle as it cradled her head. "How long?" "3 days," he said. "Doc wasn't sure you'd make it." He didn't move away. "You were right," she whispered, the fever giving her a strange courage. "I was running away, from feeling anything. It was safer to just be the spinster." "Hush," he said, his finger on her lips. "You're still weak." "No." She caught his hand. Real courage isn't running away. It's risking everything, like Sarah did, like you did, offering me a place here. Evelyn, her name was a rough prayer on his lips. I'd like to stay, she whispered, the words costing her everything. Not because I need saving, but because, for the first time in my life, I feel alive. A fit of coughing seized her. He held her through it, his arms strong and sure. When it passed, he settled her back against the pillows. Sleep, he said softly. I'll be here when you wake up. Promise? Promise. And when she woke, hours later, he was still there, holding her hand as if he would never let go. Recovery moved at the pace of a Wyoming spring, slow and tentative at first, then bursting forth. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. He brought her books from the library. In the evenings, they read aloud to each other by the fire, Bear dozing at their feet. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with words and quiet laughter. One afternoon, he found her struggling to write a letter to her sister, Margaret. How do I explain this? She sighed. Dear sister, I'm living with a reclusive rancher, wearing his dead wife's trousers, and I've never been happier. He picked up one of her crumpled attempts. You could just tell her the truth. Tell her what's in your heart. He pulled a chair close. You know, this won't be easy. The town's already talking. Let them talk, she said, lacing her fingers with his. I'm done living for other people's approval. He grew serious. I've been thinking, that old schoolhouse. It needs a teacher, and the teacher needs a place to live. He hesitated. But having her live at my ranch might cause more gossip. Unless, she said, her heart pounding, unless she had a right to be there, as your wife. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and beautiful. His hand tightened on hers. You sure about this, Boston? No going back? I'm sure. She touched the ring that still hung around his neck. Sarah taught you love was worth the risk. It's time I learned that lesson too. He pulled her to her feet and kissed her, a kiss that felt like coming home. A few days later, they rode into Thunder Valley. It wasn't much more than a muddy street and a handful of buildings. Every eye was on them. Widowmaker's got himself a woman, someone muttered from the saloon porch. Jake's hand tightened on hers, but she held her head high. In the general store, old Sam's eyebrows shot up. Well now, he drawled. Need supplies, Sam, Jake said. For the schoolhouse. Schoolhouse. Just then, Mrs. Miller, the doctor's wife, entered with two other women. Their whispers stopped dead. We're getting married next week, Jake announced, and the store went silent. Married? Mrs. Miller's voice was sharp. To him? To Mr. McCall, Evelyn corrected, her voice firm. Who is helping me restore the school for your children, unless they don't need to learn to read or write? The women flushed. I came west to teach, Evelyn continued, her voice ringing with a conviction that silenced them all. The fact that I found love along the way doesn't change that. So you can either help us build something for this town, or you can stand there and whisper. Your choice. Old Sam broke the silence with a loud laugh. Lord Almighty, Jake, you found yourself a firecracker. Mrs. Miller's face softened. My Thomas does need to learn his letters, she admitted. Perhaps we could meet to discuss what the school needs. It was a start. As they rode out of town, the whispers that followed them had changed. They were no longer hostile, just curious. The Widowmaker had laughed. Maybe, just maybe, things were finally changing in Thunder Valley. The telegram arrived 3 days before the wedding. A boy from the telegraph office rode up to the half-repaired schoolhouse, waving the yellow paper. It was from Margaret. Urgent. Jake saw the look on her face, and immediately climbed down from the ladder where he'd been fixing the roof. The message was blunt. Her father's will had been found. She was the sole heir to his library and a significant trust fund. A position at the university library in Boston was waiting for her. "Come home," it ended, "before you throw everything away." She handed the paper to Jake. His face hardened as he read. "How much does Boston mean to you?" he asked, his voice quiet. She looked around the schoolhouse. Sunlight streamed through the new windows. Piles of fresh lumber waited to become desks. "I thought it was everything," she said slowly. "But some things are worth more than security." "A university library is a fine offer," he said, his voice tight. "It's a cage," she answered, covering his hand with hers. "A beautiful, book-lined cage. I'd rather build something real here, with you." Just then, Tom, the young ranch hand Jake had hired, cleared his throat. "Beggin' your pardon, miss, but ain't there lawyers in Cheyenne? Could send one to Boston for ya. Handle things proper like." Evelyn and Jake stared at him, then at each other. Evelyn laughed, the tension breaking. "Tom, you're a genius." She sent him to town with a reply for her sister. "Claiming inheritance. Stop. Building life here. Stop. Wedding next week. Stop. Love, Evelyn." After he'd gone, Jake pulled her close. "You're really giving it all up?" "I'm not giving up anything that matters." She breathed in the familiar scent of sawdust and leather. This was real. Boston was the ghost. The morning of the wedding, another visitor arrived. Not her sister, but a man in an expensive Eastern suit. "James Harrison," he introduced himself. "Your father's solicitor. Your sister sent me." He handed her a letter. Margaret's elegant script blurred before her eyes. Father hadn't just died of grief. He'd had debts, gambling debts. The library, the house, all of it was mortgaged. The trust fund was just enough to clear his name, and nothing more. The inheritance was an illusion. The university job was real, a lifeline from Margaret. "Please, sister," the letter begged, "don't throw away your last chance." "The morning train to Cheyenne leaves in an hour," the lawyer said gently. "We can be on it." "No," Evelyn said, the word coming out strong and clear. The lie didn't matter. The money didn't matter. "Security isn't a trust fund, Mr. Harrison. It's knowing who you are, and I know who I am now." Jake appeared in the doorway, his face etched with worry. "Everything all right, Boston?" She crossed to him, taking his hand. "Everything is perfect. Mr. Harrison was just leaving." She looked back at the lawyer. "Tell my sister I'll help her handle the debts, but I won't do it by running away. I'm building a life here." "Two lives," Jake said quietly, squeezing her hand. After the lawyer left, Jake looked at her, his eyes full of questions. "Just Boston, trying one last time to call me home," she said, straightening his collar. "But I'm already home." He caught her hand, pressed it to his heart. "Still time to change your mind." She reached up, touching the scar on his jaw. "I choose this, Jake McCall. Every day, in every way. I choose this." Through the window, she could hear the sound of wagons arriving. The whole town was coming. "Now," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "Let's go get married." They married under the cottonwood trees where Sarah rested, the whole town as their witness. When the preacher asked if she, Evelyn Grace Blackwood, would take this man, her voice rang out, clear and true. "I do." The celebration that followed lasted until the stars came out. Jake found her watching the dancing, a look of quiet wonder on her face. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I knew was possible." She leaned against him. He was right. She belonged here. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small paper-wrapped package from his coat. It was a leather-bound journal. Its pages were blank. On the cover, a single word was tooled in gold. Ours. Thought we could write our own story, he said. Tears pricked her eyes. Our story is just beginning. Good, he smiled. That slow, rare smile that had first cracked the walls around her heart. I've had enough of other people's plans. Let's make our own. The fiddler struck up a slow, sweet tune. Jake pulled her into his arms. Dance with me, Mrs. McCall. 1 year later, the schoolhouse bell rang out across Thunder Valley. Evelyn McCall stood in the doorway, watching her students spill out into the sunshine. 35 of them now. A little girl tugged on her skirt, asking to borrow another book from the lending library that now lined one wall, a mix of her father's old collection and new volumes sent by a now supportive Margaret. Jake rode up, timing his arrival perfectly as always. The man they once called the Widowmaker was now just Jake, the man who fixed their fences and helped their children sound out their first words. They rode home together as the sun set, the ranch glowing with new paint and the life that now filled it. That night they sat in the library, a comfortable silence between them as he read Shakespeare, and she planned her lessons. Listen to this, he said, his voice soft. He read a passage about love, his eyes never leaving her face. She smiled. He set the book aside. Doc Miller confirmed it this morning, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Looks like we'll need to add a nursery to our story. Her hand flew to her stomach, a secret joy now shared. Sarah would be happy, she whispered, seeing this house so full of life. She'd be overjoyed, he said, pulling her close. Almost as overjoyed as I am. Outside, the Wyoming stars burned bright. The spinster from Boston and the lonely rancher had found each other in the heart of a storm. Their story, the one they wrote day by day in their leather-bound journal, wasn't an ending she ever could have imagined. It was better. It was real. It was theirs. If this story made you believe that even the deepest winter can give way to spring, make sure you're subscribed and have those notifications turned on, because you have no idea what's coming next.